Here we are, we got both seals out of there. The bushing inside doesn't look like it's too chewed up. We've got a socket that's basically the right size to fit in, because when we go to put this new seal in, we want the socket to be on the outer lip of the seal when we drive that back down inside. One last little quick wipe out with some parts cleaner. We'll take some of this Loctite aviation stuff. Here's our first lip seal and the second lip seal. And as I said, they basically get put in, one to keep water out and one to keep oil in. We'll put a little bit of gasket goo down in the hole. Don't know whether that's necessary or not, but certainly won't hurt anything. We've basically got the seals pounded back in there. Worked quite well on the vise. They just slipped right in. There's not enough strength in the top of this toolbox. But we also have this cap that was on here. Recall the white ring that I said was the seal. It's actually just a cap. And we'll need to put just a little bit of pressure on that, get everything seated down in there as far as it needs to go, and then this assembly will basically be ready to go back together. The rear bushing housing is all reassembled, new seals. We've got our O-ring, roll that on there, and we'll definitely put some gasket sealant on that when we go to put it together, but for now that assembly is complete. Definitely there's a wear pattern on the shaft itself, and you can see here the seal surface is not in the 100% condition. I'm hoping it'll survive all right though. So what we need to do is get some lubricant on that. Here's our reverse gear. We've got a thrust washer and we've got a bushing. Need to clean all of that up, grease it, and then it can go back on the propeller shaft. If we look at the teeth of the gear, you know, they've got a little bit of wear maybe, but they don't look too bad. The shift dog still seems fairly sharp. Inside looks good. The thrust washer, a little wipe down, and our bushing. I haven't put any measurement tools on this bushing, but I'm not seeing any signs of extreme wear. Everything looks relatively uniform in the wear pattern. I don't have a new bushing to put in anyway, so we'll reuse what we've got. I'm gonna say I'm reasonably happy with that. I've got some triple guard grease from BRP, Johnson Evinrude Genuine Parts. I don't know whether it's really necessary that you get the blue triple guard grease or whether just any good grease will do. I've also got a Lucas white lithium that you could probably get away with. Definitely we want to put some sort of pre-lubricant on here to make sure we're not going to get any metal to metal contact, but I don't know that we're getting so concerned. Gotta be the genuine BRP stuff, but since I got it, we may as well use the BRP stuff. It's got a reverse gear. I'm going to add a little bit of lubricant to the propeller shaft so that we're not dry. Now we slide this on. Got to make sure that the thrust washer is in there and the bushing pushed out. Get it all lined up, and it is a little stiff, but that's to be expected. Next item to reinstall is going to be the shift dog. I purchased a new shift dog for this. This is the used shift dog. This is the new one, and you can see a little bit of scratching on here, but I gotta be honest, I'm not seeing any catastrophic failure. These were known to wear out on these as far as I've been told, so that's why I figured when it wouldn't stay in gear, this must have been the problem. But again, I'm remembering from 1992 thereabouts when this would have been used the last time. My memory is generally pretty good, but that is a long ways back. We'll get the shift dog all cleaned up, get the grunge off of it, any shipping lubricant. We'll put some triple guard grease in it. I'll throw some affiliate links down in the description on where to get this stuff, because A lot of this stuff I sourced from Amazon, and they're real good about the affiliate marketing program. This is basically ready to go in place, but before we do that, we've got our little check balls and a spring. We want to be very careful that we don't lose these. We'll pump a little bit of grease down into the hole that the spring goes into, and we'll feed the spring in, and the grease will hopefully hold the spring in place so that I don't have to go chasing it, because if this goes wandering, ooh, it could be difficult to find. One check ball in, held in with grease. Again, pack it in with a little bit of grease. We'll put some grease on the splines, take the shift dog, and now this is reversible, and there is a groove in the middle, and that's what engages with these little balls. We want the dogs to be in line with the check balls that are in there, because the groove doesn't go all the way around the inside. It's just located in the area around the dogs. And to get this to go into gear, it snaps in. Now we have our forward gear, and again we've got a thrust washer in here that we need to clean up, and a bushing. The internal bushing is fixed. We have an external bushing which is just held on with surface friction. We'll give that all a good clean up and give it a little bit of fresh grease. And there is some corrosion on there. Doesn't really catch my thumbnail when I drag over. It's mostly just discoloration. That likely comes from the water that was in the lower unit when I first started working on this. And considering this thing hasn't been in the lake since the early 90s, the fact that there was water in there and it's not a big ball of rust is good news. There is a little bit of wear in this bushing. It's not too bad, but definitely there's a wear pattern to it. Not ideal, but we will make do. We've got slots where oil will be able to get into the bushing surface and ideally prevent wear. That is stiff with that nice sticky grease, but hopefully that will work itself nicely when we get once we get everything assembled. Oops, almost forgot the thrust washer. As you can see, I put that together and it was catching, and that told me that there was something wrong. There's our thrust washer. Get that down, put a little bit of grease on the front face of it. Now we install, and there. Now we're not engaging in the on the shift dog at all. Those gears spin. They're a little stiff because of the thickness of the grease, but for the most part they are good. Now let's take the rear seal and we'll force some triple guard into the seal. We don't want the end of the shaft to go through there and cut anything up. Likewise, we'll put a little bit on the bushing, front face, thrust face of the bushing. And that is our assembly. Everything turns. Wipe the worst of the grease off of the gasket surface here. And my reason for wiping the grease off here is that we're going to, when we assemble this into the lower unit, we're going to have to put a gasket sealing compound on there, and we want it to stick to the aluminum part, not to be held off by a little bit of grease. Basically, the propeller shaft assembly is ready to go back into the lower unit. Here's our main drive shaft. This actually goes up into the bottom of the motor. You can see there's a little bit of something on there, and there's an O-ring that we'll be putting on here, and we want to put grease. ideally, I think some moly grease would be good to go on this, where it goes up into the bottom of the crankshaft. And the reason that we want to put grease on this is that it becomes next to impossible to remove the drive shaft, or to remove the lower unit drive shaft, if this spline becomes seized into the bottom of the power head. Basically, it welds the lower unit into the power head. So definitely we want this to be cleaned up nice, and a high quality grease on here. Never seize might work, but definitely moly would be good to go on that. Here we have our drive shaft gear, and supposedly these are not that difficult to remove. This one seems to be stuck, and there's not any reason that we need to remove it, so we'll just clean it up, clean up the thrust washer, and we'll reapply some of the triple guard on there so that it's good and lubricated, and then it can just go back in the lower unit when we're ready to do that. I'm going to take this over to the bench grinder wire wheel and clean the rest of that. Looks like the gasket sealing compound that's on there, and the wire wheel's the easiest way to pull that off. We're to the point where we need to get the top seals done here on the lower unit itself. We've got our lip seal here, the same idea, double, one to keep oil in, one to keep water out. There is a removal tool that you can use. It's kind of a step thing, goes in through the center and just catches the lip of the seal and can extract it. However, I don't have one of those, so we're going to have to just kind of ham fist it with a big screwdriver. The other one that we're going to have a hard time getting out, we'll figure something out. Worst case, I'll fire up the lathe and make something that fits in there. But we've got the shifter seal, and there's two big chubby O-rings that has to get packed down into that bushing assembly that's there, and unfortunately we've got to get it out to be able to do that. So we'll figure something out. First off, let's get these seals out. Now the tricky part here is that we don't want to bend up the water pump housing and damage it while we want to remove the seal. This is a little tricky to do. The O-ring hook, and we'll try and get the seal part out of there. That might make getting the metal shell out a little bit easier. It is coming. There we go. There's the top one out. Now we need to repeat for the bottom. You know what? That's not a seal. That's the roller bearing. We don't want to beat that up. Now, I don't know whether you guys can see that down there or not, but there's a whole bunch of garbage hanging out down in that shaft. We'll try and wash it through with the parts wash here. Doesn't seem to be cooperating. We'll take a strip of towel here and run it through. See if that'll clean things up. Well, it helps significantly, but it's still some stuff in there. So we'll pull another strip, feed it through. Get it well soaked in the parts cleaner. Yeah, I don't know whether you guys can see that. Much cleaner. Let's get some grease packed into that bearing. We definitely don't want this bearing to be dry. Those of you who have been watching the channel for a while may have seen my video last summer from when I had the failure of my Force 120 horse lower unit. And basically what happened was this top bearing piled up. It was full of rust. And even with oil, it basically didn't take long for it to fail. Now we have two thin seals that basically go together again. We want to go lip to lip so that we want them like this, although that's difficult to put in. because we want the seal to be keeping water out and oil in. Something tells me these are not quite OEM style seals. I think we're going to have to install them so that they're both facing in. Not that I really want to do it that way, but I think just the situation we're in, we're going to have to. We got the second seal put in there. Need a little bit of the triple guard grease. And this is kind of critical on this in that we're going up against the seal with the spline of the shaft, and we definitely don't want the spline to cut the seal. So now basically all we've got left to figure out how to deal with is the shifter. And it's just basically like a brass plug that is in there, and we've got to convince it to come out. Trouble is, all we have to work on is a 1/4 inch hole way the heck down in there. Might be able to get this piece of brass to help. Yeah, it kind of feels like it's on something. We got it to tap out of there. Kind of a little bit ignorant. It's an odd kind of a situation in that the O-ring is down inside and then it goes down into the hole. Kind of makes it a little bit obstinate to get out of there. I guess that'd be a good way to put it. But with a little bit of work, we managed to get it. We take a pick, get our O-ring out of there, give it a little squirt down. That is our shift rod bushing. There's the new seal. A little bit of the gasket sealing compound in there. And we force the new O-ring in nice and flat. Use the butt of my punch. Looks like a good size, because we don't want the seal to be crooked. We've got the O-ring seated. I don't know how well this is going to show up. That little hole right there is the one that the bushing needs to get pushed back down into. Of course, going back down into the hole will be much easier than coming out. A little felt washer we got to change, which we happen to have in our parts kit. Put a little grease on there so that everything stays together. I've got it started in the hole. Now we need a larger drift to come down. Hunk of brass looks just about perfect, so we don't want to scar this up. And we are seated. Let's give this just a little bit of a cleanup. Probably should have done that before we started putting seals and bearings, or seals and grease and stuff in there, but gave this just a little bit of a scuff down with a wire wheel mounted in my impact driver, and I got the grunge off of there. That is good. The next thing we want to do is we want to stuff a main drive shaft in. So let's force the grease and grime off the fingers, and we'll put a little bit of the triple guard into the bottom bushing of the input gear. Grease there, grease down inside. Here's our drive shaft. We've got grease on the base of the gear. We've got grease. Probably use a little more. And as I said before, we want to get some grease on these on the spline so that they don't chew up the seals when they go through. There is our input. Next item, we want some lube on the teeth of the gear. Now we want our shifter shaft to go down through. And you can see we've still got a little bit of grunge on here. I'm gonna go clean that up on the wire wheel. I'll be right back. Now part of our problem here is the top of this shaft is exposed to exhaust gases, and therefore it gets all coked up with partially burnt oil, and we definitely don't want that running up and down in the seals. We'll put some grease on here. And that is our shifter. Here's our Skeg unit, and we've got a couple little issues here. Obviously it's been dinged by something at some point and has a dent in the O-ring channel. And we've got our shifter dog here, and we need to remove that. I know I said at the beginning not to remove that, but there is a seal that we have to change on that bolt. and I think it's probably easier if we reassemble the fork onto the assembly before we put everything together. The same spot that we have our little ding here, we've also got a small burr that is pushing up on that. We'll take a file, just clean that up. No more burr. And run it over the mating surface. We don't want to scar up the mating surface, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it doesn't have any more burrs that are going to cut any seals. Just run the file over the flat face. Wipe off any grindies that we created. Phillips screw takes that pivot pin out, and there's pretty much no O-ring left on that. That might be where a lot of our leakage was coming from. Here's our pivot pin. Now there is a hole for a cotter pin in this, but there was no cotter pin. I think we should remedy that. Let me dig around in my stuff. I've got a bunch of small cotter pins in my airplane building supplies. Obviously we don't want a great big long cotter pin sticking out like that, but we can trim that off easily enough. There we go. Now our pin's not going to walk out of there and leave us stranded in a gear we don't want to be in. Our next assembly to go in is the main propeller shaft, and we've got a hole here, has to line up with a dowel pin right here, and we need to get some sealant on there. Now I just purchased this stuff, high-tack gasket sealant. The part store I went to didn't have the fancy 3M, I forget what the number is, and this is what they recommended instead, so we'll give this a try. I don't know that this is really any better or any worse than the just the standard gasket sealing compound that we already have, but we'll give it a try. Give that a moment or two to tack up, and then we'll drop the propeller shaft in place. Now there's a dowel that is down in here, but it does not stick up very much, and I can see where it has been forced into this bushing. There's a groove here that I suspect is supposed to line up with that dowel pin, and there's a notch on the opposite side to let us know where the dowel pin is. So I suspect that is how we are supposed to line that up. I don't have the manual for this motor, so I can't say for sure, but that makes sense to me. Now we have our shift fork. This is the original one, and again, it doesn't look like it's in bad shape, but we also got a new one with the shift dog kit, so we may as well put it in as well. Put some triple guard grease on here. We want the tips of the pivot to drop down onto that little shift fork that I just put in place, and that will adjust our forward or reverse gear. And we are able to turn the propeller shaft, but of course everything's thick because I've used thick grease. When you're assembling the lower unit, you want to kind of try and turn things just to check. I want to make sure that nothing's jammed. Stiff is okay because I've used thick grease, but jammed is not okay. And we are to the point that we need to put this on. One thing I forgot to mention when we were cleaning things up, right here is a magnet. It's a little black thing, and we want to make sure that that gets wiped off. There was a little bit of scum on it, but it wasn't that terrible. Now we have some spaghetti seal. This stuff is, for lack of a better term, not the best. It is a cheap substitute to the original BRP stuff. Unfortunately, the only length of like the shortest chunk you can buy of the original BRP stuff is like 50 feet. You've only got one lower unit to do. It doesn't make much sense to order in 50 feet of O-ring material. What we're going to do is lay it in the little track here. We want to cut it off flush, but we want it to have a little bit of overhang so that it's putting pressure on the top of the spool. And now we will lay in some of this wonderful high tack stuff and see whether it is as high tack as it promises to be. Doesn't exactly appear to be. I don't know, it seems to work all right. And then a little bit of the scum inside. I don't think we necessarily want that. And we want to lay some of this stuff on the top here. We most certainly don't want this to leak. One suggestion I've heard is to lay it in good right in the corners where the O-ring material meets the spool. Now we bring this down in place. And now is our opportunity to reinstall this. An O-ring that is supposed to be on there to keep everything nicely sealed up. And we'll just put a little bit of the gasket sealing compound on there to hold everything. It's not necessarily going to line up at first, but with just a little bit of a wiggle on the shift shaft, that lines up quite nicely. We don't want to over tighten so that we're forcing the O-ring out of there, but that works. Now we've got our fasteners that hold the skeg to the lower unit. Put a little bit of gasket sealing compound on there. Essentially working like never sees, and we'll just work our way around. These screws have definitely seen better days. As you can see, they're kind of wallered out a bit. If I ever have to rebuild this again, I will probably try and get some replacement screws. I'm sure that they are available. Bigger number 3 Phillips. Put a little bit of force on here. Kind of do a star pattern, how we're snugging it down. And that should have our lower unit basically put back together again. Well guys, I hate to break it off here. This video is starting to get a little long. We're almost a half hour into this and still lots more to go. This is a logical place to end things, so we'll stop here and check back hopefully next week for part 3 of this series, and we'll get this lower unit all buttoned up and put back on the motor. Thanks a lot for stopping by, appreciate it. If you got this far in the video, can you do me a favor and throw me a thumb up, like, and if you want to see more stuff from Doug's Messy Garage, why don't you hit that subscribe button, maybe ring that bell icon, and we'll catch you in another mess. Thanks a lot, bye.